Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, today I'm going to be painting this dwarf miner from Highland Miniatures. It's a 3D printed model, and I plan to use them either in games of Regiments or Warhammer Old World. So we're going to be using a basic scheme here, starting with a little bit of blue around the base for his cloth. That's the color that I'm going to use to kind of unite the entire army, is that blue. Now, one thing I got to say at the outset here is I don't plan on using any washes except for a few exceptions. So this is going to give him kind of like a cartoony look, very, very bright. I'm only going to highlight up for the most part and use my base colors as my shade. Now, as I said, two exceptions. There will be two places I use a shade or an ink to darken things down a bit, but other than that, this is just going to be layering. So while I'm waiting for that blue to dry, because you do not want to try and put shade on wet paint, that will work very badly. So we're going to color in all of the silver, and there's quite a bit of it, but it's kind of scattered around. So we've got some on the helmet, there's the chainmail shirt that he's wearing on his back, there's the head of the pick that he's carrying, there's a couple other items like the chisels on his belt, but we're not going to do that quite yet, because there's other colors underneath, and it's very difficult to paint deep recesses when there's already the upper areas painted. I always find it's probably easier to start with the deepest parts of the model and work upwards. So the last thing we'll be painting will be things like his beard, because that's at the very, very tip. Anyways, give a good going over. You'll probably have to do it twice, because over a black primer, the silver doesn't always cover it all the way the first time. And now that we're waiting for the silver to dry, before we move on, we can go back and finish up that little bit of cloth at the bottom of his armor. So Drakenhof Nightshade is a really nice shade. You could use Nuln Oil if you want to. I just wanted to keep that blue tint to it. For these guys, you're really not going to notice it that much, but on some of the other dwarves that have a lot more cloth on them, it makes a difference. So whatever one you pick, just make sure you use it consistently. So for this one, it's what I call like pinstripe shading. I don't wash over the entire cloth. I just put it in the recessed areas, the folds, anywhere where the cloth bends inwards. There's not much on him, so this is pretty quick. And if you're very, very careful when we get to the highlighting, you don't even need to wait for the wash to dry, because it should only be in the recessed areas, and then this light blue, we're just going to paint on the highlighted areas, like very, very tip. And so this will give that illusion of 3 dimensions to the cloth and really make it stand out. For this guy, again, not too much because it's just the hem, but on some of the other models, you can really see that difference. Next, we're going to work on the skin. That's the next major area that's easy to get without getting in the way of anything else. So for this one, you will definitely need 2 coats. Bugman's Glow will never, ever cover the whole thing nicely just on the first coat. Make sure with the model you look over as get anything from the face that's sticking out, nose, eyes. Double check to make sure if the model's wearing gloves versus if it just has like wristbands or something like that, little things. But you'll definitely need 2 coats, and then you've got your base layer of your skin. Made a bit of an editing boo-boo here and accidentally shut the camera off instead of on when I was painting the leather armor here. So this is another model that's at the same stage of painting. I used Dryad Bark for the color here as my base for the leather armor around him. Now you can slap this on pretty messy. Don't worry if it gets on any of the tools, just as long as it doesn't get on the silver or the blue. So that's where you want to take a little bit of care. But other than that, put it on. Just make sure you cover the whole thing. As you know, I like to bounce back and forth between colors. While one dries, you work on the base for another. So while we're waiting for that brown leather to dry, let's finish up the skin details. So that second coat of Bugman's Glow is dry. Now we're just going to highlight with Cadian Flesh Tone or Kislev Flesh or some other lighter tone. Just get the raised muscles. So I'm trying to show you here. You do not have to shade the whole or paint the whole thing. Let the Bugman's Glow underneath be your shadow. And just like with the Bugman's Glow, you're gonna need 2 layers of paint, because you can see by itself this first one, it kind of looks awful because of how much it shows the color underneath. But when you paint the second layer on, it'll start to look really, really nice. You'll see this good contrast between the darker flesh underneath and the lighter flesh on top. So So while we're waiting for that first layer of the lighter skin tone to dry, let's go back to the leather armor using Gorthor Brown. You can use any brown, just if you want to make it a tan, more brown, more yellow, more red, like whatever kind of brown you're looking for, this is where you add that in here. Now, like you did with the flesh, do not cover over everything. Instead, you want to paint more of a stripe that colors like 80-90% of the brown underneath. And then that first layer of Dryad bark becomes your shade. And it also helps accentuate the fact that this is like strips of leather armor that have been sewn together. So take your time, be careful. Again, try not to get anything on the blue or the flesh, but if you just do those stripes, you'll see the leather armor now suddenly stands out a lot better. You may have to go back and do 2 coats, at least on the fatter strips. The thin ones seem to cover pretty well. The fat ones, you may want to do 1 stripe and then go back and do another stripe that's about 80-90% of the first stripe, and that will create that kind of blending effect for you, and it'll look really nice when it's done. Alright, well, before we do a whole lot more on this guy, we got to make sure we do the apron he's wearing in front, because there's a lot of detail above the apron, so you got to get the apron underneath. I picked a nice tan color, like Steel Legion Drab. You could use anything you want. You could use a cloth color. You could make this the accent color. You could paint this blue to make it stand out a bit. I decided I was going to have the miners wear a leather apron, but you don't want to have that leather too dark, otherwise it'll blend into your armor and it won't stick out. It'll just look like part of the armor rather than a separate feature of the model. Depending on the color and the pigment, you may have to do 2 layers. And again, you can slap it on pretty messy because everything that it'll get on top of, we'll paint over again later on. Now we're almost finished with like the upper torso, at least except for a few things, which we're going to touch on now. So first, I add a little gold stripe. There's a little bit of metal that's connecting the arms of the armor to the main chest part, and I decided to paint those gold just to give it a bit of an accent. Every model in the army is going to have it. Add some color and some variety to it. Nice and quick, 1 or 2 coats and you're done. Okay, now that we've got all of the colors underneath the belts and straps, now we can paint those. So using Rhinox hide or another brown, and again, between the leather, the apron, you got to make sure you have a couple browns here so that they don't all blend together and they look a little bit different. So all of the dwarves in my dwarf army have this Rhinox hide belts and straps and webbing, I believe the modern terminology is for it. But be very careful, because if you accidentally slip and get any of the brown on anything underneath, you're going to have to redo it. But go back, make sure you get the straps over the shoulders, the straps underneath, dangling down by his legs, his belt, all of that good stuff. You shouldn't need 2 coats because this is a pretty good pigment, but depending on what you use, you might. Let's do our highlighting now on the apron while we wait for the belts and straps to dry. There's not too much on him. There's a few places where the cloth stands up. It's nice and easy for you to see where you're supposed to put it. Just use a lighter tan or a khaki color to highlight it. Those bits of cloth that are holding the chisels in, just do a nice stripe across the top there to help them stand out a little bit. Now, when I'd finished highlighting the apron, the belts and straps weren't dry yet. So I figured, since we just did the apron, it's pretty much finished. Let's get some silver, lead belcher, some kind of metallic color, and we'll paint those chisels that are being held in by his apron. So nice and simple, not very difficult. You just got to be careful you don't accidentally paint over the apron. Now, as I was spinning the model to paint the hammer at the back, I noticed that the head of the pickaxe was a little bit weak on the silver, so I touched it up. It's not necessarily a step in the process, it's just something I noticed. But when I spun him around back here, you have the head of that hammer that you got to paint as well. So 1 or 2 coats, quick going over, it's done. Alright, the belts and the straps are finally dry, so I'm going to go over them with Doombolt Brown. Now, this isn't an entire layer over the whole thing. Instead, this is a little more than a highlight, but a little less than a second layer. So I paint quite a bit of it on there, but I don't completely cover it. Instead, I want to make it give a different color so it sticks out from the leather armor underneath and the haft of the pickaxe and all the other browns. but I didn't want to make the whole thing this reddish brown. So instead, where the light's going to hit, the top edges by the shoulders, the top part of the belt loops there, the top part of the straps, and then let the natural Rhinox hide color underneath act as your shadow. Just about finished with our browns. We still have the haft of the pickaxe. So I got yet another brown that I have, Mournfang brown. A little bit brighter, a little bit warmer color here to do a base coat. And don't forget to turn him around and do the handle on the hammer that's gone through his belt loop at the back. Now we can turn to painting his gloves. I'm going to use the same brown as I used for the armor so that it blends in, gives him some more uniformity. So just as we did with the leather armor, we're going to use Gothor brown or whatever lighter brown tone you used, and just get the fingers on the hands and then the knuckles. Anywhere where you can see that the model actually has a nice sharp raised edge. Same thing with the cuffs on the gloves. Don't paint the whole cuffs, just the edges of them. And this will give a really nice definition to it, makes it stand out. Little higher quality than just plain old tabletop. Okay, now it's time for the most iconic part of any dwarf miniature, and that's his beard. Now, since I already have another dwarf that's blonde, I wanted to make sure I didn't make my dwarves look too carbon copy, since there's only a few different sculpts in the set. I think there's a total of maybe 5 different prints. So I needed to make sure that the beard is what set them apart. So this guy is going to have a dark black beard. It's not going to be gray. He's not old. And so the next step after putting down this base coat will be to highlight it. Now I picked Corvus Black because it's not a dark pitched black. I want it to be a dark gray, but not so light as he looks like he's an elderly gentleman. Instead, this is a nice black, but has enough light to it that it's easy to highlight and it doesn't look like you're peering into, the abyss. One thing I like about these Highland miniatures is everything is very, very well defined. The beard has lots and lots of very sharp or easy to pick out edges. So getting a grayish blue, there's a bunch of different ones you could go with. I decided to pick Thunderhawk blue for this one. And I'm only going to do one level of highlighting. If you really wanted to get fancy, you'd do one layer of slightly darker gray, and then Thunderhawk blue would be your last highlight. But using the edge of your brush on very, very sharp edges, or the tip of your brush on some of the more subtle edges, just pick out the majority of them. Again, you want to leave, looks like about half of that darker color underneath to give the illusion of individual strands of hair. So we really only got one thing left, and that's the candle on top of his head. So we're going to start off using this Rathkar Flesh or some other beige or really, really light tan. Now, I'm not going to leave it this color. The thought of a skin candle on his head's kind of disturbing. But this is a great base for the much, much lighter color that we're going to use afterwards. So for the actual wax color, I'm using Pallid Witch Flesh. You can use any color that's a really, really light cream. You don't want white. That'll stand out too much. Plus, you'll see when we do the flame, there's another reason you don't want white. So pick some kind of really, really light tan, parchment color, something. Unless, you're going for something really dramatic, like green candles or blue candles or something like that. But otherwise, some kind of super, super light skin, or very pale skin, or very, very light parchment color. So after putting your second coat of the wax color on, because you're going to need it, get the brightest white you have and paint the flames. You may need a second coat. You could, when you're doing the base coating of the candles, paint the flames as well, because it'll be easier to paint white over cream than to paint white over black. But you want these super, super bright. The reason you want that white on the flame to be super bright is because we're actually going to just color it with our other wash. So yellow, either a contrast yellow, a wash, in this case I'm using Cassandora yellow, paint it over the flame and baboom, you got yourself a nice, good flame color. And the wash will take care of shadows and recesses, and the top part will look a little brighter. I mean, I found this a little while ago, and now if it's a small flame, I do all of them this way. So there he is, all finished. No washes other than on the cloth and the flames, and yet he's still got depth, shadow. I think he looks pretty good. And here's the best part. This took me 2 hours. Not 2 hours to do one, 2 hours to do 5. As soon as I finished the guy I was filming, I turned the camera off and then painted that item on the other 4. Did it like an assembly line. And when you get into a groove, you can start working through your models pretty darn quick. So what we had here was 5 models, an entire row done in just 2 hours. Do that every couple days and your rank and flank army will be on its way very quickly. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Granted, this paint scheme isn't going to win you any golden demons, but if you take a look at it, I would argue that it's good enough.